Welcome to Just the Stats NFL. My name's Ernie Jennings. I'm your host, and today we're going to do one of three podcasts that cover the Super Bowl. So the first one here, we'll start with just a little bit about the game itself, where it's being played, the two teams, their background is primarily what we're going to look at in the Super Bowl, the different times they've both appeared in the Super Bowl. And obviously, for the Patriots, they've been in the Super Bowl quite a few times. So we'll talk about that. And then that'll be it. And then a couple days later, maybe Wednesday, I believe, and Friday, I'll try to wrap up a couple more, one on some statistics, some looking at the game, situations, and so forth. We'll find some things to talk about. As with the Super Bowl, they have to find things to talk about for 2 weeks. So we're going to do 3 podcasts on it. So let's get going. This is Super Bowl 60. Amazing that that's the case. It's going to be played at Levi Stadium, which has always said San Francisco, but it's really Santa Clara, the Bay Area, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Kickoff will be at 6:30 p.m. on Sunday, February 8th. So should be I'm hoping for a really great, exciting game. And I do have a team I'm rooting for, but I still want it to be exciting, not a blowout one way or the other. So that's what I'm looking for. So like I said, this is going to be in Levi Stadium in Santa Clara. And this is the second time that Levi Stadium has hosted the Super Bowl. The previous was 10 years ago in Super Bowl 50. And that one, I will say, as far as logistics go in the city and their effort to put on a good Super Bowl, did not do well. They had a lot of controversy that came out of this. Economic, logistical, political headaches, all of it showed up in 16, and they did not handle it well. But since then, it seems that they have figured out a way to host not just the Super Bowl, but other major events in sporting world and do it in a way that is good for the fans and the city as well. So just looking back at Super Bowl 50, the city expected to spend about $5 million. Now, you're talking about 10 years ago, so it's a lot more now, on police, transit, and public services. It cost them almost $10 million, in fact, what they estimated. So they were way off. The Super Bowl 50 only generated less than $12 million in revenue. That's incredible. We're talking about the Super Bowl. And we'll see what it's going to generate, what they think it'll generate this time around. Some of the problems they had were traffic, road closures, transit disruptions. They just didn't have it figured out very clearly. The roads were congested, detours were everywhere, transition was delayed. They didn't get it. The transit was delayed. They just didn't have it ready to go. As much as they thought they did, they weren't ready. One of the biggest things, though, that I remember specifically was the fact that they decided to highlight, to me, I thought it was their effort, not their effort, the lack of effort, I think, actually, but the city's homelessness situation. They kind of made it a highlight, and that really bothered a lot of people. Not that that's something, obviously it's something you want to deal with, but the fact that they made it kind of showcase it over the fact that you had a Super Bowl here. And so a lot of people, not only some of those people are homeless, but when you watch them, they're using drugs, the safety effort situation. It was a lot of things like this, and it really did not go over well. And I think they figured that out. If they were ever going to host another sporting event, that would not happen again. Another thing that was a big factor was this kept being pushed as a game in San Francisco when actually it was in Santa Clara, and they did not get their due recognition, they felt like, Santa Clara, financially or publicly. So that's been dealt with. So those are some of the issues they had. Now, so what do they do this year? As I was reading about it, they've obviously made a much bigger effort to prioritize cleaning the streets throughout the Super Bowl week. And they already did this, so they've kind of had practice. In 2025, they had the NBA All-Star game there, and that went over fairly well. So they have kind of gotten a trial run with the NBA All-Star game, which obviously it's a big event, but it's nowhere near. It's what, a fraction the size, and on the scale of events, it's so much smaller than the Super Bowl, but at least it was a shot for them to get a clear idea of how they were going to do things. So they made a much bigger effort on public safety. That's one of the biggest things. They've hired a lot more police to enforce the law. So their presence is going to be much more relevant or pronounced during the Super Bowl week. And they're working with Santa Clara and San Jose, who's also part of this, to make sure everybody's involved, not just one city. Did a lot better job in transit, making sure everybody can get around instead of just shutting off streets. And so running a bunch of extra transit trains, 22 extra trains on Super Bowl Sunday to make sure that everybody can get there. And then a lot more communication between the three cities, which is another lacking thing. So this year, the host committee is thinking they're projecting that between the three cities, they'll pick up a revenue economic benefit of about $440 million. So quite a boon to the area. And obviously, California needs it, seems to be verging on bankruptcy. So they need whatever they can get in that area, obviously. So those are some of the big things with the city itself and their efforts to host another Super Bowl. So I think after 10 years of kind of ugly Super Bowl 50, they're ready now for Super Bowl 60, and they'll do a much better job. Now let's look at the teams. This is the New England Patriots versus Seattle Seahawks. Both teams 14-3 going in. The Patriots had to play one extra game because they were not the number one seed. That was Denver, who they beat. Whereas Seattle got that first week off and then won their next couple of games. So going into it pretty, on paper, at least on record-wise, evenly matched teams. And we'll look at what the odds makers are saying as well. So let's look at the New England Patriots. Obviously, everybody knows they've been in so many Super Bowls. It seems like they're in the Super Bowl every year, but in actuality, they've been in 12. They've won 6. This will be their 12th one, actually. They've won 6, lost 5. So kind of almost split here. If they win this one, they would give them their 7th title, which would tie the Steelers for the most Super Bowl championships. So that's a goal for them. Seattle has a different goal. Now let's look a little bit at these games that the New England Patriots had in the Super Bowl. Now they were in a couple Super Bowls prior to Tom Brady, Bill Belichick era, which was from 2001 to 2018. But they did not win the early ones. We'll talk about those in a second. But the ones they did win were in 2001, the first year. They beat the Rams 20-17, which was an upset that kind of launched this whole Tom Brady, Bill Belichick dynasty. It was the start of the dynasty. 2 years later, they're back in again, and they beat the Carolina Panthers in a really close game. I remember that game, 32-29, just a narrow victory. And the Panthers were really, at that time, a fairly new team. Very next year, beat the Philadelphia Eagles 24-21 to get back-to-back championships. Like I said, every year, you think that they're in the Super Bowl every year. Well, they're not, because they went 10 years between Super Bowl 39 beating the Eagles to Super Bowl 49 when they beat the Seahawks in a game that they should never have won. They won that game 28-24 on goal line interception in that game. How crazy was that? Gee, that was terrible. The decision to throw a pass on the 1 yard line when they've been running the ball at will has been a hotly contested event ever since it happened. It's just a crazy play. And then in 2016, 2 years later, in Super Bowl 51, they beat the Falcons in another game they should have had no business winning. And again, you can just look at the decision making of the coaches on the play calling. Throwing a pass why was still to this day, it's amazing that they thought that was a good decision to make. But this was a historic comeback. Patriots were losing 28-3, and they win the game 34-28 in overtime. It was an amazing collapse by the Atlanta Falcons. Just unbelievable. Those are 2 Super Bowls that, honestly, I don't think the Patriots had any business winning. And then their final one was in 2018 in Super Bowl 53. They beat the Rams again in a very low-scoring game, 13-3. It was really more of a defensive struggle than anything else. They lost Super Bowls in 1985, which was Super Bowl 20, against the Bears. They got slaughtered 46-10. That was one of the biggest losses in Super Bowl history. 96 and Super Bowl 31, they were beat by the Packers 35-21. And then they had 2 games against the Giants in Super Bowl 42 and Super Bowl 46, which was 2007 and 2011. They lost to the Giants twice, 17-14 in the first one and 21-17 in the second one. That was one of Eli Manning's victories there. And then in 2017, Super Bowl 52, they lost to the Eagles 41-33. High-scoring game there. So looking back at some of these memorable ones, the losses to the Giants were incredible. The one was in 2007 was when the New England Patriots were undefeated in the regular season. And that ended with the Giants beating them in the Super Bowl. So now, we're down to this Super Bowl, the Patriots against Seattle again. That'll be an interesting game. Now, looking at the Seattle Seahawks Super Bowl history, they've been, I didn't realize this, but they've been to the Super Bowl 4 times. And they've only won once, but they have been there 4 times. In 2005, Super Bowl 40, they played the Steelers. They lost that game 21-10. That was their first trip to the Super Bowl. But Pittsburgh was just too dominant, and Seattle could not handle Pittsburgh. Then in 2013 in Super Bowl 48, that's the big one. They beat the Denver Broncos 43-8. It was a crushing defeat for Peyton Manning. Just a dominating defensive performance by the Broncos. It was really impressive. The Legion of Boom really played well. And Russell Wilson played well as well, but it was the defense that was dominated in that game. Legion of Boom was Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor. Really a great defense that year. And Russell Wilson was really good in that game, and his leadership showed, but he also was pivotal in the loss the very next year against the Patriots in Super Bowl 49 when they lost that game 28-14. They were making a comeback in that game, got down to the 1 yard line, and decided to pass the ball instead of just running it in, and was intercepted. Malcolm Butler intercepted that pass. That is an interception that's been one of the most replayed and debated single plays in Super Bowl history. And you know good and well that it's being shown these next 2 weeks over and over again. So this is a chance for the Seattle Seahawks now to come back and play the Patriots again. And even though we're talking about two completely different teams by now, from 2014 to now 2025, there's like a sense of a rematch versus the Patriots, a redemption and just a franchise resurgence for the Seattle Seahawks to get over that last Super Bowl that they were in and they lost in a crushing way. It's their chance to come back and right the ship and avenge the loss to the Patriots, which would have been now 11 years ago. So that's that's the two teams. It's really amazing when you go back and look at the history of these two teams. This is going to be the Patriots are in a lot, but like I said, they haven't been in the Super Bowl since 2018. So it's been a little while for them. Obviously, it's been even longer for Seattle. So since 2014. So they're looking forward to getting back in this and, like I said, avenging the loss they had before. Now, looking at the odds in this game, the consensus view is that the Seahawks are favored by anywhere from 3.5 to 5 points. And 4.5 has been kind of a standard number that the Seahawks are favored by. And we'll look later in the week at some of the stats and why they're being favored and what's the advantages that they're saying that the Seattle Seahawks have that puts them up as the team that's being favored. The game total over under is 45.5 points. So you're talking about a game that's somewhere like, 24 to 21, maybe something like that. That'd be 45 points, somewhere in that range in the 20s. If both teams score in that amount, and it's a close game. Pretty impressive that Seattle has looked really good in their wins, and the teams they've defeated throughout the year. It's been like I've said before, it's been a much more difficult schedule for the Seattle Seahawks versus what the New England Patriots have done. Not that they've both beaten some good teams. Obviously, they got to the Super Bowl, so they have. But the Seahawks had a much tougher road to hoe, and they've done quite well. So some of the early MVPs, obviously, are the quarterbacks. Sam Darnold for Seattle, Drake May for New England. Always the quarterback's going to be the first shot at getting the MVP. And we'll see what happens there. Honestly, if you're looking at MVPs, like a surprise one, be somebody like Jackson Smith-Njigba, maybe, if Seattle wins, or even Kenneth Walker III, if Seattle wins. And then for, other than Drake May for New England, I'm not sure who could be the guy who, hey, how about the rookie TreVeyon Henderson? Maybe he has some of those breakaway 50-yard runs for New England or something, a couple of those in the game, and rushes for, somewhere like 150 to 200 yards. Maybe he could be the other guy. But for New England, if they win, most likely it's going to be Drake May that gets the MVP. But for Seattle, I think you've got 3 players that could end up being that, not counting anybody on defense, which is always a possibility. Not as likely, though. All right, so that's just a quick look at the two teams, their Super Bowl history, and where it's going to be played, the odds, that kind of thing. Looking forward to looking at the stats behind it. Like I said, why is Seattle favored by 3.5? That's a pretty decent amount. 4.5, actually. They're talking, close to, I don't want to say a blowout, because 4.5 points to 5 points is not a blowout, but it's a pretty big margin for a Super Bowl games. Las Vegas must really like some things about Seattle Seahawks, and we'll look at those things in the next podcast, next couple of ones. Just a quick look at the two teams. Appreciate you listening. Please like and subscribe. You can watch this video on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. You can listen to it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, whatever app you may use. I appreciate that. You can leave your comments, and please like and subscribe. So with that being kind of a short one, but I wanted to get it out. That is a wrap. Until next time, I'm out for Just the Stats NFL.